The first sign that something was terribly wrong wasn't the fire, it was the silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the whole sky was holding its breath. Moments later, the USS Blackstar tore out of warp like a wounded beast, its hull glowing with streaks of heat, its engines dragging long trails of burning plasma behind it. No one knew where it had been. No one knew what it had seen, but every sensor reading said the same thing. The ship had crossed a line no human vessel was ever meant to cross. And something had followed. People across the fleet whispered about the Blackstar long before that day. It was the kind of ship you only heard rumors about, fast, experimental, and assigned to missions no one else dared to touch. Its crew had a reputation to calm under pressure, sharp when it counted, and stubborn enough to push back when the universe tried to swallow them whole. The ship was built for deep space scouting, but everyone knew that scouting usually meant trouble. Even so, nothing could have prepared them for the war that was waking up in the dark. When the Blackstar arrived, limping toward the defense line, its comms were a mess of static and fractured voices. The only clear message that cut through the noise was short, shaky, and enough to freeze every officer on duty. "They're coming, and we're not sure we stopped them." After that, the flames around the ship dimmed, and a brief, eerie calm settled over the bay. The crew was rushed into medical and debriefing, but the ship itself, that was another story. Parts of its outer plating were scorched as if touched by something far hotter than any known weapon, yet there were no signs of impact. No debris, no energy signature that matched anything in the database. One crew member, still trembling, whispered during debriefing that what they saw in deep space wasn't an enemy fleet, at least not in the way humans understood it. He described shapes that seemed to fold in and out of reality, forms burning with a cold, white fire that didn't spread like normal flames. It consumed light, heat, even sound. It moved with intent, with hunger, and the Blackstar had only barely outrun it. Word of the encounters spread fast, sparking fear and arguments across command. Some wanted to quarantine the ship, others wanted to tear it open and study whatever had touched it. But a few believed something else entirely, that the Blackstar hadn't been running away. It had been trying to warn humanity that the war hadn't just started. It had already begun, somewhere far beyond familiar stars. Now the ship sits under heavy guard, its engines dark, its hull still bearing those strange burn marks. Inside, logs remain locked behind security layers no one can crack, and the crew, they refused to talk about the final minutes before they warped home, because according to them, the real threat might not have stayed behind. And as the temperature around the Blackstar begins rising again slowly, quietly, everyone fears the same thing. Something is waking up. The temperature readings from the USS Blackstar kept climbing, so slowly that no alarm sounded, but steadily enough that the engineers watching the panels exchanged uneasy looks. Nothing on the ship was powered, nothing should have been generating heat, and the bay's cooling field was functioning perfectly. Still, the numbers inched upward, like the ship was breathing warm air into the room. Most of the technicians tried to ignore it, pretending the data was just a glitch. But deep down, each of them felt the same strange pull and instinct to stay away from the vessel, even though they couldn't explain why. While the bay filled with hushed worry, Command tried to piece together a timeline of what happened during the Blackstar's last mission. The logs they managed to recover showed normal readings at first, a routine long-range jump, a survey of a quiet star system, and standard communication updates. Then, without warning, the logs turned strange. Screens filled with scrambled symbols, sensors went blind, and the navigation feed glitched into static. Something had interfered with the ship's systems, but there was no sign of an attack, no familiar signature from any known enemy. Whatever had touched the Blackstar didn't leave a trace humans understood. One analyst pointed out a repeating pattern hidden deep inside the corrupted files. At first it looked random, but the more they studied it, the clearer it became. The pattern formed a shape, circular, layered, like an eye or a portal. No one could decide which was worse. Some believed it was a warning. Others thought it was some kind of mark, and a few feared the truth was bigger than any of them wanted to imagine. The crew might have brought something back, something that didn't need to board the ship to follow it home. The crew themselves were kept in isolation, under medical observation. Their vitals were stable, but their behavior worried the doctors. They reacted sharply to sudden light, flinched at loud noises, and spoke in short, tense sentences, as if they were afraid of saying too much. One officer tried to joke that they were just exhausted from the mission, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. Everyone felt the same strange tension, the sense that the crew knew more than they were letting on. During one interview, a crew member admitted that the shapes they saw in deep space didn't behave like ships or creatures. Instead, they moved with a rhythm that felt deliberate, almost like they were studying the Blackstar rather than chasing it. Another crew member recalled hearing a low hum during the encounter, a sound they couldn't explain. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't coming from inside the ship. It felt like it was coming from the space around them, as if the void itself had started to vibrate. Back on the station, a quiet debate started behind closed doors. Should the Blackstar be dismantled to understand what had touched it? Should the crew be quarantined longer? Or should the entire area be locked down before anyone else was exposed to? Whatever this was, no one could agree. No one felt safe. and no one noticed when a faint pulse of light flickered across the Blackstar's hull soft, quick, almost like a heartbeat. The temperature rose half a degree more, and somewhere deep inside the silent ship something shifted. The shift inside the USS Blackstar was small enough that the guards didn't hear it, but one of them felt it more like a pressure in the air than a physical sound. He glanced at the ship, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. The bay lights flickered at that exact moment. Just once, but long enough to make his pulse jump. He tried to laugh it off, telling himself the power grid was overdue for maintenance, but the feeling didn't leave. It clung to him like a shadow that wouldn't fall away. Command sent a new team to inspect the ship, this time a group of specialists known for handling unusual tech. They approached the Blackstar carefully, speaking in low voices as if the ship might hear them. One of them placed a scanner close to the hull and froze when the device began flashing unfamiliar symbols. The scanner wasn't malfunctioning, the symbols were the same ones found buried in the corrupted logs. Whatever had touched the ship had left its mark deeper than anyone expected. The specialist tried to record the readings, but the device powered down on its own. When he attempted to restart it, it wouldn't even turn on. The ship seemed to drain energy from anything that came close, like it was feeding off the equipment. The team retreated, shaken, and reported that the Blackstar was changing, but they still couldn't say how or why. Meanwhile, the crew in isolation struggled with memories they couldn't fully explain. One crew member insisted that the shapes they encountered didn't just move, they reacted. Whenever the Blackstar shifted course, the shapes adjusted their positions, almost like they were mapping the ship's decisions. Another described a moment when the stars themselves seemed to distort, stretching and folding around the shapes as if space was bending to make room for them. The doctors listening tried to stay calm, but the more they heard, the clearer it became that this mission had crossed into something far beyond normal deep space threats. A quiet argument began within the isolation ward. Some crew members believed the shapes were a warning, not an attack. Others were certain the shapes were preparing for something larger, and the Blackstar had become the first target. One officer whispered late at night that the war everyone feared wasn't coming from enemy fleets or hostile worlds, it was coming from a place humans had never meant to enter, a region of space where the usual rules didn't apply. Back in the bay, the temperature rose another fraction of a degree. Engineers tried increasing the cooling field, but the readings barely shifted. One technician leaned closer to the hull out of curiosity and felt a faint warmth pulsing through it, steady and rhythmic. She backed away quickly, her mind racing with the thought she didn't dare speak aloud. The ship felt alive. As command argued over next steps, another problem surfaced. Station sensors detected a tiny distortion in space just outside the perimeter, small, quiet, but growing. The readings matched nothing in the database. But one detail chilled every officer who saw the report. The distortion looked like the same circular pattern found in the corrupted logs. The specialists scrambled to confirm the data, but even before they finished, everyone sensed the truth settling in the air like a storm cloud. Whatever had followed the Blackstar home wasn't finished yet. The distortion outside the station grew slowly at first, barely noticeable unless someone stared straight at the readings, but within an hour it doubled in strength, bending the edges of the sensor graphs like something was pressing against reality from the outside. Command sealed the hangar and ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate, though they didn't explain why. They didn't have to. Everyone felt the same pressure building in the air, the same quiet tension that made each breath feel too loud. Inside the bay, the USS Blackstar began to hum again, low, steady, and unmistakably alive. The guards stepped back, their hands hovering near the emergency alarms but not quite touching them. The lights dimmed on their own, this time not flickering, but sinking into a softer glow as if the ship was drawing in the power. The hull pulsed once more, brighter than before, reflecting that strange circular pattern the specialists had identified. It was no longer faint, it shone like a brand. A group of officers rushed into the bay, led by the station's commander. He didn't raise his voice, but every word carried a sense of urgency. They needed answers from the crew, and they needed them now. 2 officers were sent to escort one of the crew members, someone who had been calmer than the rest, someone who seemed to understand the shapes more clearly than anyone else. When questioned, he didn't hesitate. He said the distortion forming outside was the same phenomenon they had seen before their last jump, back when the stars twisted and the shapes emerged. But now, the distortion was stronger, directed like something searching for a way through. While the officers digested his words, another alarm erupted through the station. The distortion had stabilized into a perfect circle, smooth, symmetrical, almost unnatural. The readings around it began fluctuating wildly, showing bursts of heat, fluctuations in gravity, and a strange flicker of energy that wasn't on any chart. People crowded around screens, whispering in disbelief as the circle began to distort the space around it, pulling at the stars like a silent whirlpool. Back in the bay, the Blackstar's hum grew louder, echoing off the walls. The commander watched the hull glow brighter, the pulsing pattern now synchronized with the energy readings from the distortion outside. It was impossible to ignore the connection. The ship wasn't just reacting, it was responding. as if whatever was outside was calling to it, and the ship was calling back. The engineers tried one desperate move, shutting down the entire hangar's power grid. They hoped cutting all energy would quiet the ship, maybe break whatever link was forming. The power cut worked for everything: lights, consoles, ventilation, everything except the Blackstar. The ship's glow didn't fade, its hum didn't soften. It kept pulsing, warm and bright in the total darkness, feeding on an energy source no human system controlled. As the emergency lights flicked back on and command scrambled for a new plan, the bay doors trembled, not violently, just enough for everyone to feel it in their bones. A deep, resonant vibration rolled through the metal as if something vast was pressing against the station's outer shell. Sensors bled. The distortion outside had grown again, expanding outward like a blooming star, and in the center of it, something moved. A shape, faint but unmistakable, folding in and out of sight. The crew member watching the screen whispered the words everyone else was too afraid to say. "They found us." The Blackstar answered with another pulse of light strong enough to cast long shadows across the bay. And then the distortion outside surged, pushing the station to its limits, bending the darkness into something alive, something reaching forward, right as everything finally began to break. The station shook hard enough that every loose tool in the bay rattled across the floor. The distortion outside stretched wider, its edges shimmering like liquid light trying to force its way into real space. The officers braced themselves, expecting the shape to break through, but instead something stranger happened. Everything went still. Not calmer, not safer, just unnaturally still, like the universe had paused mid-breath. Even the Blackstar's pulse froze for the briefest second. Then the station's systems lit up with new readings. A second distortion had appeared, not outside, but inside the station's perimeter, far beyond where sensors should have allowed anything to slip in unnoticed. It was smaller, unstable, flickering like a spark caught in a storm. But the moment it showed up, the larger distortion outside stopped expanding, almost as if it were waiting. Command scrambled to analyze the readings, but the data made no sense. The two distortions carried the same strange pattern, but they weren't identical. The smaller one pulsed at a different rhythm, out of sync with the Blackstar and the shape outside. It was behaving like something trying to communicate, or something trying to interfere. The commander immediately ordered the bay sealed even tighter. If a second distortion had formed inside the perimeter, then the threat wasn't just coming from outside, they were already dealing with something inside their defenses. And the Blackstar, still glowing softly in the half-light, reacted again. The whole brightened at a new frequency, different from before, almost like the ship was torn between two signals. One of the specialists, pale and shaken, pointed at the readings and whispered that the smaller distortion wasn't hostile. He believed it was a counter-signal, something trying to disrupt the larger presence pushing through from beyond. At first no one believed him, but then the data shifted. The smaller distortion surged and the massive one outside dimmed, as if losing strength. The two forces were fighting right there, in the fabric of space around the station. The crew member who had warned everyone earlier stepped closer to the screen, staring hard. He recognized the pulse of the smaller distortion during their mission, just before the shapes appeared. The Blackstar had detected something faint in the distance, something that flashed only once, like a warning signal before the darkness swallowed everything. The crew had written it off as static interference. But now, hearing that same pulse echoing inside the station, he realized they might have been wrong. Maybe the Blackstar hadn't only been chased. Maybe something else had followed too, something trying to help. Before command could decide what to do, the bay shook again. This time the vibration came from beneath the floor, rising through the metal like a wave. The Blackstar's lights flickered wildly, its hull cycling through patterns that no one had seen before. The ship was responding to both distortions now, caught in the middle of a struggle far beyond human understanding. The specialists argued, some insisted they shut down the bay completely to break the connection, while others claimed doing so might help the larger distortion overpower the smaller one. The tension snapped into chaos when the smaller distortion suddenly expanded, not as large as the one outside, but large enough to trigger emergency sirens all across the station. Its pulse grew sharper, brighter, almost urgent, like it was trying to force everyone to understand something important, through the glass window overlooking the bay. The crew member watched the two distortions pulse faster and faster, each beat pushing the other harder. He felt the hair on his arms stand on end. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. The second distortion wasn't trying to break in, it was trying to hold something back, and for the first time, he realized the bigger danger wasn't what was trying to enter their world, it was what was trying to leave it. The two distortions pulsed so fast that the readings almost became a blur. The larger one outside hammered against the station like a tidal force trying to push through, while the smaller one inside flickered with desperate energy. The Blackstar glowed brighter than ever, caught between the signals, its hull vibrating like a tuning fork struck too hard. Everyone in the bay felt the pressure building, a low thrum that seemed to rise through the floor and settle behind their ribs. Then the station lights cut out every panel, every console, even the emergency strips. Darkness swallowed the bay for a heartbeat. When the lights surged back, the Blackstar stood completely still. No humming, no pulsing, just silence. But the distortions didn't stop. They grew louder, brighter, until the space around the station warped like heat rising from desert sand. The commander shouted for shields to be raised, but the systems didn't respond. Something had overridden them. A thin ripple of light swept across the bay doors, followed by another. Before anyone could react, a sharp crack echoed through the hangar, not breaking metal, more like breaking space. Everyone turned just in time to see the larger distortion outside burst open. But instead of flooding the station with fire or hostile shapes, everything froze again, quiet, weightless, almost peaceful. A figure of light, not quite a shape, not quite a shadow, hung on the other side of the bay doors, wavering like a reflection on water. It didn't push forward, didn't attack. It simply hovered, as if waiting. The smaller distortion inside pulsed sharply, and the Blackstar came alive again. But this time, its glow wasn't chaotic. It was steady, intentional. A soft beam of light spread across the bay floor, reaching toward the giant shape waiting outside. For a moment, every officer thought the ship was surrendering to it. But the beam stopped short. It formed a line, a boundary. The two distortions flashed simultaneously. The larger one sent a wave of force toward the bay, but the smaller distortion flared with equal strength, pushing back. The energy clashed silently, bending the air but never touching the station. The Blackstar intensified its glow until the two distortions synced for the first time, one rhythm, one pulse, and then everything snapped. A shockwave of light filled the bay, but it wasn't hot or painful. It felt like a deep breath washing through the space, smoothing the distortions until they both collapsed into a single fading shimmer. The station steadied. The pressure vanished. The sensors cleared. The danger was gone. The crew exhaled as one, exhausted but relieved. The commander ordered teams to sweep the area, confirming the distortions had disappeared completely. The Blackstar dimmed, settling back into its silent state, its strange marks cooling into harmless patterns that looked almost natural. But just when everyone thought it was over, one final alert chimed across the consoles. A message appeared, one that hadn't been sent by any human system. A single line of text flashed across every screen. "We are not your enemy, but something else is coming." Before anyone could respond, the message erased itself, leaving no trace it had ever existed. And deep inside the Blackstar, in a dark corner no scanner could reach, a faint new pulse began. Slow, subtle, and unmistakably different from the ones before. For a long moment, no one moved. The last faint pulse inside the Blackstar echoed through the bay like a quiet reminder that the story wasn't as finished as everyone hoped. Still, the chaos was over. The distortions were gone, the station was stable again, and the crew finally stepped out of isolation, each of them blinking at the brighter lights as if waking from a long, uneasy dream. The commander ordered a full review of every system, every log, every scrap of data the Blackstar had brought home. Teams worked in silence, still shaken but grateful to be dealing with ordinary problems: loose wiring, damaged consoles, melted sensors, anything physical, anything normal. What they couldn't explain, they simply wrote down for later. There would be time for theories, time for analysis, time for the kind of deeper questions no one wanted to face in the middle of a crisis. The strange message that had flashed across the screens became the center of every discussion. Some believed it came from the smaller distortion, the one that had fought to keep the larger presence at bay. Others wondered if it came from the Blackstar itself, or from whatever force had touched it during the mission. Whatever the source, the meaning was clear. The shapes they had seen weren't a single threat. They were part of something much larger, a conflict unfolding far beyond human borders. As the hours passed, the uneasy fear across the station shifted into something else: curiosity. The specialists replayed the energy readings from the final clash, noting the way the rhythms aligned and then collapsed. It looked less like an attack and more like a conversation. A warning passed back and forth in the only language those beings could manage. The crew of the Blackstar, once too shaken to speak, began sharing clearer memories. They recalled brief flashes during their escape, patterns in the stars, flickers of light, moments where they thought something was guiding them rather than chasing them. They had been so focused on the threat behind them that they never noticed the faint signal ahead. Now, with everything that happened on the station, it made sense. There hadn't been one force in the dark, there had been two. One reaching for them with fire, and one pulling them away from it. The repairs on the Blackstar took days, but the ship never fully returned to its original state. The whole marking stayed, dark and shimmering like cooled metal that had once burned too hot. But the ship's internal system stabilized. No more strange pulses, no unexplained lights. Whatever had left its mark inside had grown quiet. When command finally cleared the ship for debriefing, the crew stood at the ramp together, looking up at the vessel that had brought them home. They didn't see a cursed object or a threat. They saw a survivor, scarred, changed, but still standing. The commander met them with a simple order. They were grounded, at least for now. Humanity needed time to understand what had happened, time to prepare for whatever might come next. The galaxy suddenly felt bigger, stranger, and more alive than anyone had ever imagined. As the crew walked away from the bay, one of them paused and glanced back. The Blackstar sat quietly, its shadow stretching across the floor. For the first time since the ship had returned, it looked peaceful. But the message echoed in everyone's mind. Something else is coming. Not a threat to fear blindly, not a mystery to ignore, but a future waiting in the dark one humanity would have to face with open eyes. And whether the Blackstar flew again or not, its journey had already changed everything.